Good morning, America. How are you? This is Pushback, and welcome to another Saturday morning, December 5th, and our show Pushback, brought to you by Robert Knorr's Normal America and Pennsylvania Patriot Radio. Good morning, Todd. How are you?
Currently unmuting.
I wanted to let everybody know that Robert's going to be with us today, but he's going to be with us mobily, and we'll be coming in and out. So you guys should be aware of that. And I guess I want to make sure that everyone, knows that we appreciate them coming on today. May you be happy, and may you be safe, and may you be healthy, and may you be living with ease, which I know there's a lot of people that are not. That being said, let's talk about what's happening this morning. Have any of you realized that the single and lone person standing between our constitutional republic and total chaos and anarchy is President Trump? Never in my life have police officers and police chiefs and DAs and mayors and governors and other people that represent us be so actively in with the people that are perpetuating violence around this country on their very own communities, and are reconciling with people like the New York Times and the Washington Post and PBS and NPR and all three networks and big tech and CNN and Hollywood, academia, and the institutions and the foundations, celebrity culture and professional sports. A great collusion, if you will. It's not a sane world anymore. It's not a sane culture. You can't trust anybody. And this is a radical revolution to nakedly change the structure of our constitutional republic that was deliberately found to safeguard us from the very same people and mobs that are now trying to change it. Are you not concerned about the incuriosity of grave election irregularities from the left, spearheaded instead by a full-throated outrage saying that President Trump does not deserve his day in court? Is there, and has there ever been a question worth pursuing and a discussion worth having, signaled by the strong disagreements to those answers, to those questions? Not whole cloth shaming because, we dare petition or appeal for clarity regarding obvious election irregularities. It's upside down. Precisely which deeply held moral conviction by any left-leaning leadership keeps from being gravely concerned about the following? Just a couple of things. Why did 7 states stop counting on election night? Why did these states lie about actually stopping the count when they didn't? Why did they keep Republicans observers away? Why are all the errors that were corrected initially favor Biden? Why were there egregious overcounts in precincts to the tune of hundreds of percentages? Why did it take 2 weeks to count the vote and then 12 hours to recount them? Why, on the face of all these irregularities, are zero Democrats curious as to how these things occurred? In PA, why did the governor, the AG, and the Department of State Secretary remove the safeguards of voter deadlines? Remove the postmark requirement? Remove the signature verification requirement? All with the blessing of the state Supreme Court. Why? The primordial question at the heart of all this, of all these questions, is without a remedy, how do we keep faith in our elections going forward? How do we pay taxes? Who do we trust? I mean, based on what happened in the last 4 years, do you trust the FBI to look into voter irregularities in this country? I don't. I'm sorry. Call me whatever you want, but I don't trust them based on what's happened in the last 4 years. The greatest gift that America has is our Constitution, which then allowed us to institute a government to secure our rights. We better do it now and remedy the poison from the fruits of voter fraud. That being said, Todd, if Trump loses, do you think that there will ever be a time where we can begin to have an honest conversation about COVID beyond just the reflexive obsession of locking down the country?
So you want to have an actual conversation about COVID? That's what you just asked me?
I did.
In the post-Donald Trump era?
This is what they hired me to do here.
That's what you wanted me to answer?
Yeah.
With Anthony Fauci now as the chief medical advisor for Joe Biden?
You mean...
This is the question you've asked me.
You mean...
First thing here on Saturday morning at just a little bit after 11 a.m. That's what you've aed me?
Yeah.
You waited a week to ask me that?
They finally revealed that Fauci's a double agent. Yeah, it's horrible. I see that we have the great Jason Fitzgerald on. Is he on audio only today, or is he you're keeping him on ice?
I think I'm going to just be on audio today.
What a radio voice that is. Jason Fitzgerald, president of Penn Strategies, is joining us today.
You guys wouldn't want to see my face today.
I was going to say, is it a Saturday face for radio? Is that what you're trying to not tell us?
It is, right? It is.
So go ahead, Todd. Will we be able to have an honest conversation about COVID now that if the president loses?
No, and Nancy Pelosi told us exactly why we're not going to have that conversation yesterday, because she came out and said, well, listen, we've had COVID relief sitting on and again, I'm paraphrasing, we've had COVID relief on the table, but because we don't like the guy that's in charge right now, we're just going to hold everybody hostage until he leaves. And now that he's leaving, we can get some things done. And
Joe Biden said that he would fix it all. That literally what she said.
Well, here's the great news about the COVID conversation you want to have. It's not really a COVID conversation you want to have. You want to know how we cured the flu without a vaccine. Have you seen the flu numbers right now?
Yeah.
It's non-existent. So COVID's cured the flu.
Astonishing.
Who knew?
It's astonishing. I had a conversation with the Lycoming County coroner, and I got to tell you, he put it more succinctly than I did, and I'd love to bring him on and talk to him about it, but I want to keep him as non-political as possible because he has a very, very good reputation as being a public servant in this county for over 30 years, and I'm not looking to make it political. I'm not looking to make it political, but I am very, very interested in making it clear for people as to what's happening. And part of that clarity, I think, and where I'd like you to be able to comment is where are we going with these numbers vis-a-vis what they get in return from the government if these are COVID, deaths or COVID cases, they get certain dollar amounts, and it's extremely concerning to me that that's the open door of how they politicize COVID, and it's a grave concern, especially talking to the Lycoming County coroner, that you could say that these things are COVID deaths, but there's no autopsies to prove it anywhere in the country.
To your point, and then we can introduce our very special
guest.
Guest.
I just saw her. Yeah.
If you want to have that conversation going forward, if any elected official wants to have that conversation going forward, the first thing in this state, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, needs to do is we need to have autopsies of everyone they've claimed has died of COVID.
And
that's the first thing.
And if you talk to coroners, it's about 7 to 12%, depending on the area, and that includes New Jersey and New York.
They will not let the Department of Health will not let the coroners certify those deaths. But that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. It's a legal argument, and you know me, Carlos, I love a good legal argument.
Well, I am very excited, extremely excited to introduce you to Counselor Heather Heidelbaugh. And she ran against the current DA in the state of Pennsylvania this year for the AG position. And we're going to talk to her about that. But the reason why we asked her on today is because, as you know, part of the core idea of our show is to try to make things simple and with respect to all the lawsuits and all the legal things that are happening in the country right now before the 14th, before the electors vote, we wanted to have Heather on to come on and explain to us a little bit of her take on what's going on. But before we do that, good morning, Heather. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
You can hear us, right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So Robert Knorr had an emergency today, but he will be coming on at some point. He's actually in the car, so he'll be coming on audio. And then we also have a friend of the show today, Jason Fitzgerald, who you might or might not know, but he is the president of Penn Strategies out of Watsontown, Pennsylvania. So welcome to the show.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Good. I voted for you.
We all did.
Thank you.
And I had your sign in my yard.
Thank you so much.
In fact,
about 3 million Pennsylvanians voted for me, so we just missed it.
You did very well.
Yeah.
We'll get it next time. We need you to run again.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about you, and then roll into, if you can, to the lawsuit that was filed by Representative Kelly and Sean Parnell.
Sure. I'm a practicing lawyer. Have been a lawyer for 36 years. I live in Pittsburgh. I'm an equity partner in a law firm in Pittsburgh, and I never left the firm because I'm a part owner. So I've returned to working full time as a lawyer. I have a deep knowledge of election law and have done election laws probably for 32 years. The election law in Pennsylvania is a code, much like the Internal Revenue Code. So it's very specific, and there are not a lot of lawyers who specialize in election law. I represented George Bush when he ran for president. I was in charge of the legal effort in Pittsburgh and then throughout the state. I did the Ralph Nader case. John Kerry, when he was running against Bush, wanted to have Kerry knocked off the ballot. Nader knocked off the ballot for about 2 percentage points. And then I also was hired by the John McCain campaign in the state committee to investigate Acorn, and filed suit against Acorn, and spent a year of my life chasing down Acorn, eventually working with the Congress and Michelle Bachmann, who ran for president, to defund Acorn to the tune of about $1.5 billion a year. So, I have some legal knowledge about election law. Mm-hmm. I was asked to look at the lawsuit that was filed regarding Act 77. And it's a novel theory, which I think has some merit. Since the beginning of Pennsylvania law and our Constitution, the voting in person has been the gold standard, which is what I've always advocated. And even if you look at emerging democracies throughout the world, they advocate for in-person voting. I've never been in favor of mail-in voting. Well before the current debacle, I've lectured all over the country about that. And so the theory in this lawsuit is that each time there was a chip away at in-person voting, absentee voting, and expanding the ability to not vote in person, but to vote away from the precinct, that had to be approved by both houses of the legislature on 2 separate sessions. And then it had to be presented to the people, and the people through a constitutional amendment had to pass that. That did not happen this time with Act 77, which provided no excuse absentee balloting. And so the thought is that it didn't pass the second house, didn't pass the second time in the legislature, and it was never presented to the people. So allowing that to happen was really a violation of the Pennsylvania Constitution. Now that case was filed. It went up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which currently has 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And it pains me to always say that, because I'm a lawyer. I love the law. I put my hand on a Bible and swore to the Constitution. And these matters should not be partisan. They should be, as you read the law, sometimes I don't like what the law says, but I have to follow it, because that's the rule of law. We are a nation of laws. We're not, I say this all the time and people kind of fluff it off, but I really need to say this to get people to understand this. Our nation was founded because we were mad and disgusted at always having to listen to what one person said. And that one person was the king. And so we decided for the first time in human existence that we would engage in self-rule, that we would all get together as a society and figure out how we were going to rule ourselves. And so we, the people, are the ones who decide how this is all going to go down. And it's not the Secretary of State, who's an unelected, appointed bureaucrat. It's not the governor. It's the people, and the people are represented through the legislature. Now, sometimes we don't agree with what they do. I didn't agree with them, passing Act 77, but they did. But they had to, and there's some legislative history where you can see that they attempted the process of beginning to amend the Constitution by this. So they were going to have to pass it in the second legislative session, then put this initiative on the ballot for people to say, do they want mail-in balloting or do they not? Now, the tricky part of this whole case is the relief requested. So most lawsuits, you go to court, and I do a lot of other work, represent companies, I represent people. I'm kind of a very eclectic practice. I do a lot of different things. You have to ask the judge or the jury for what you want. I want money. I got hurt by somebody. So what did the Congressman Kelly and Sean Parnell, who ran for Congress out in Pittsburgh, what did they ask for? They asked that the votes that arose from the mail-in ballots be struck. Now that is a tremendous request. So the Pennsylvania Supreme Court denied the request and said the basis for it was that the lawsuit was too late, that there was inherent in the legislation a requirement that within 6 months of its passing, you had to contest the constitutionality. Now, I think it's unclear. I think that ruling is not the ruling is unclear. The ruling's clear, but whether they're right or not is unclear. So it's gone now to the Supreme Court on a request that the U.S. Supreme Court hear it. It's called a writ of certiorari. As we all know, the Supreme Court does not hear every case. It picks certain cases, and it picks very few cases. The judge who hears the request for writ of certiorari from our state, which is in the Third Circuit, is Justice Alito, who I actually appeared in front of once on the Third Circuit very nice judge to appear in front of. And I think he is concerned about the things that have happened in election administration in Pennsylvania in the 2020 election. I think he's concerned about whether Secretary Buckvar has violated the Equal Protection Clause of the US Constitution. But let me be clear here, this is a very different case that we have in front of, potentially in front of the Supreme Court. Where the lawsuit is saying that the legislature putting in place and the Secretary of State through the executive branch, Act 77, without amending the Constitution, is a violation not of the US Constitution, but of the Pennsylvania Constitution. So the highest court of our land, Pennsylvania, has said, we're not going to even get to the merits of that argument. You filed too late. So we're asking the US Supreme Court to look at that and to say whether, in fact, it's a violation of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And typically, historically, the US Supreme Court is hesitant to weigh in when the highest court of the land has already, our land, Pennsylvania, has already weighed in. But it is interesting that Justice Alito has asked the state to reply by December 9th, which is a day after the deadline, December 8th.
And that came down last night.
Right.
That came down last night. I was just going to ask you that. And the tweet that I saw was Pennsylvania election lawsuit has been officially docketed. And I wanted to ask you what that meant. At the Supreme Court, Justice Alito has ordered the state to respond no later than December 9th. What does that exactly mean?
So the case is docketed just means it's been filed. Okay. And the fact that Justice Alito has ordered a response is a big deal. Okay. I did a writ of certiorari in the Ralph Nader case. And at that time, our judge was Judge Souter, and he took a look at it. We knew that, but he couldn't get other judges to agree to have it reviewed. So I think that I'm not a Supreme Court lawyer. I don't specialize in Supreme Court law, but I think that for him to have ordered a response, there must be other judges who are also interested in this.
Right. So once that is answered, they get together and they need to have 4 judges, per my understanding, to be able to hear the case. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. That's
okay.
Right.
And then they would decide. And then is it a good thing or a bad thing that the court that threw out the case with Representative Kelly and Sean Parnell threw out the case and didn't adjudicate it as constitutional or unconstitutional? Is that an issue?
Oh, sure. The Supreme Court is going to look at what Pennsylvania said, but they didn't decide it on the merits. They didn't decide whether it was a violation of the Constitution. Right. They said you filed too late.
And that's not a good sign, because by not deciding the merits, yes, there are arguments that could be made that the SCOTUS will look and try to preserve what the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania decides, but by them not deciding, it opens the door, especially.
No, I think you're going down the wrong path with that. No, it's just the Supreme Court would be able to look at everything.
Okay, and especially because it's a federal election, no?
Yes, there's a federal component to it. That's right. But I'm not sure why they're interested in it. When I looked at the case, I looked at the legal arguments, and I thought the legal arguments were strong. Every single time in Pennsylvania that there has been an expansion of voting outside of the polling place, it has gone to the people. This is the first time it hasn't. So I thought that was a very persuasive
That's interesting
argument.
So in your mind, what are can you do a 60-second encapsulation as to the case that was filed in the Middle District of Pennsylvania here in Williamsport with Judge Brann? And also, can you talk about what the difference is between the Trump administration filing suit and someone like Kelly and Parnell filing suit, they're not the same people. And everyone, there's a lot of people on social media deriding the president because every case that has gone to court, 38 of 39 he's lost, but he's only filed 2, correct?
Well, I don't know those statistics, but I think last I saw there was 19 in Pennsylvania and all of them had been lost.
Right, but they're not the president filing them. There are other people who are looking to get relief.
Let me say this globally as an election lawyer. You had the election on November 3rd. Okay. And so you have to have a finality on December 8th. Look at how little time you have as a lawyer or as a candidate to look at an election. You have 35 days that,
right.
I am a trial lawyer. That's what I do all day long. So I have somebody comes to me with a small case, medium case, large case. Almost all the cases take a year to 2. The larger cases, I just finished one that took 5 years, 60,000 documents, 40 depositions to prove that somebody was defamed. Okay. To pull out the facts, take testimony under oath, file briefs. You're asking the system that we've all agreed to, an election on November 3rd, a certification to the Electoral College on December 8th. We're asking everyone that all be decided in 35 days. There's really no time as a lawyer. And I've done it. I've done recounts. I've done election contests. I've gone into court. There's very little time. Now, you may say, oh, we need more time. We should have more time. Well, we as Republicans, we like certainty in our elections. We don't want continual fighting about it. Biggest thing about American elections is that people have to believe in the system, have to believe in the integrity of the vote. That's why what's happening right now is so constitutionally dangerous for our democracy. Because if people don't believe in the integrity of the vote, the whole thing falls away. And so if you grant more time, there's going to be more arguments from people who are not successful. In terms of the question you asked, about the president, there was an enormous amount of things that happened in Pennsylvania that the Secretary of State did, issuing guidances at the last minute that are contrary to long established election law, that the legislature is going to have to get involved. She went way beyond what her statutory authority should be. She fundamentally changed the substantive law, election law. That's not her role. That's the role of the legislature, really the people to decide that. The problem is going to be that Wolf is the governor for the next 2 years. And so any bill that would be passed by both houses of the legislature would be vetoed by Governor Wolf. And it's going to be very, very important for us to get a Republican governor to change these laws, to make certain that in the future we do not have a rogue Secretary of State who, one unelected person, totally unelected, she has almost no background in election law, decided to fundamentally change election laws for the 5th largest state. Very, very frightening.
So can you walk us through the legal argument that Judge Brann used to strike down the case that Rudy Giuliani and Mark Scaringi brought in the Middle District? I guess it was 10 days ago.
So that was the case that was originally filed by Trump's lawyer, who is a very close friend of mine, who was tortured by the Lincoln Project. That complaint had many changes to it. You know, Judge Brann has been called an Obama appointee. He is a Republican judge. He was a Republican before he went on the bench. He was appointed as part of, sometimes the new president will appoint the prior judges who had been selected under the previous
Gotcha.
president. So he was a Republican judge, and I like to get that. There
Right.
shouldn't be any Republican or Democratic judge,
Right.
but he was selected.
Right.
And
Toomey endorsed him initially.
Yes, I mean, he was, he had I think he's a registered Republican. Okay, so it's very, I don't want to make apologies for anyone. I don't sit in his shoes, but going back, what you have to present is you have to present evidence. I'm not saying the lawyers didn't do a good job, but how can you get evidence in 35 days? You can't do it. If you had somebody who said, I personally took the ballots and I filled out the oval because somebody had a gun to my head, and I'm sorry that I committed this voter fraud, then you would have evidence. In Western Pennsylvania, Judge Nicholas Ranjan also threw out a case saying, I need the evidence. Now, there's two different things I think people are getting confused about. There's voter fraud, which is a ballot is fraudulent. Then there's election administration. So when I talk about Kathy Buckvar, the Secretary of State, and the rules she implemented on her own at the last minute, that's election administration. How we're going to carry on the election, which ballots we're going to count, which ballots we aren't. There's tons of issues about that. Okay. And that has to be handled through the courts and legislatively. Then there's voter fraud. We find out there used to be an example of this. When we had the old machines prior to 2002, you had to go in the morning and you had to make sure they were at 00. You had to go to click a little thing, make sure there wasn't any votes registered on the machine, because sometimes people would try to put 300 votes on the machine to start and people wouldn't notice it. So you always had to check they were at 00. So if we had a situation where we could prove there was 300 votes on a machine, could we prove that Dominion's machine was flipping? You need to have proof. Now, what affidavits did they attach to their complaint? I don't know. I know Rudy has consistently said he has thousands of affidavits of voter fraud. So if I was a judge, I would say, okay, look at the affidavits. Is there a scenario here that add up to the margin of victory? 78,000, I think, was what President Trump lost by. Are there that many votes? And if so, we have to look into it. But usually if you have evidence of fraud as the lawyer, what you do is you file an election contest where you ask that the election be redone because fraud has pervaded the election so much. And it's my understanding that has not been done in Pennsylvania.
In your opinion, in your legal opinion, what is the remedy to Secretary Buckvar overstepping her bounds with respect to the postal, the extension, and the signature requirement, which the last one is the one that I just can't get my head around.
I can't either. I've spoken a lot about the failure to examine the signatures. Now, your listeners may be interested to know that when Ralph Nader was kicked off the ballot, because he typically would get 2% of the vote, that effort was undertaken by a couple of Pennsylvania legislators who eventually went to prison. because they elicited the support of 50 state workers to examine the signatures on the nomination papers, not petitions, nomination papers of Ralph Nader.
Right.
He was a third-party candidate. He had to have 90,000 signatures or something like that. And so there were 16 contemporaneous hearings undertaken by the Commonwealth Court in which each signature on the nomination paper was examined. And they eventually knocked out so many signatures, they knocked his nomination off, so he couldn't run for president in Pennsylvania, which resulted in, a huge bonus gate, lawsuit and all of that.
Right.
So during the Ralph Nader case, the Democrats absolutely cared about signatures. They absolutely cared about whether a person signing a nomination paper was a registered elector. But now all of a sudden, they don't care. And that was just a nomination paper. That wasn't an actual vote.
Right.
And
so that's not voter fraud. That's just voting election management neglect or
well, it could be voter fraud. It's both, because it's election administration. She decided to not follow the law, which requires a signature check. Okay. And we don't know, because she didn't do it, whether there were people fraudulently voting.
Hey, I don't know if you can hear me. This is Rob Nord in the car. Thank you so much for joining us, Heather. I don't know if it was out of Michigan or Georgia, but I had heard that Dominion argued in court that they couldn't audit their systems because it would give away trade secrets. In your professional opinion, how do we trust an election that we know can't be audited, whether it be for trade secrets or whatnot? And do you think this increases the likelihood of potential election fraud going forward in the future if these audits aren't allowed to occur?
So I served on the election review board. Every county has an election review board. It's 3 people in a home rule county. It's your county executive and your 2 at-large members. And they're the 3 individuals who are responsible for certifying the vote for a county. Okay. So we would have regular meetings, and we would have citizens come in complaining about the prior election system. And then you had, obviously, the 2016 election, where people alleged that people like Russia could hack into the systems. So there was this massive undertaking after 2016 to change the election systems. Now, when that happens, when you change your system of voting from the machines we used to have in 2000, we changed them in 2002 with the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, the Baker-Carter Commission, changed everything into these electronic machines. And then again, we have here after 2016, again, changing the machines. Each time you have the availability as a county to check out the machine and have it certified and to do tests on it. So each county, there should be data on what tests they performed, what information they received from Dominion or any other provider, and what conclusions they came to before they decided to pick these machines. It's my understanding there's 19 counties. I'm not totally swearing to that number, but I think there's 19 counties that chose the Dominion machine. Back in 2002, when we went from the big, bulky, huge machines that you would go in and you would pull the lever and there was a big curtain behind you, those were the best machines. Let me tell you why. There was a sheet of paper in the back. And when I would press the lever, it would make a mark on the paper. You couldn't trace my vote, which we never want to do, but there was a mark on that paper. There was no software. That you couldn't hack it because it's making a mark. It's not an individual ballot. So, we don't want individual ballots because people who are in districts where there's no person of the opposite party, they can fill out the individual ballots and you can't trace it. The machine could be voted that way too, but That's why we have to have poll watchers. But you would take that big piece of paper off and you would look down at the bottom and it would tally itself. And you could see there was 234 votes. That was it. No software, no ability to hack, no ability to pre-program. Old school, heavy, not fancy, okay, but solid as a rock. We didn't have these problems. You know, I like the whole system of in developing countries where an individual voter has to go into a public place where their neighbors are watching. Republicans, Democrats, third party, everybody's watching. And you stick your finger in a well and you know that you voted. You can't vote twice. You know, in America, I believe it's a civic duty, a right and a responsibility to cast your vote. And you should do it once. Your neighbors should be watching. We should have certainty about the integrity. We should be able to have results pretty quickly so that we don't have this problem. And there has to be custody over the document, the ultimate tally document. You know, when you have a mail-in vote and you comes to my house, I've moved, it's directed to me, there's no chain of custody, which is a huge concept in evidence that we lawyers deal with all the time. There's no ability to, there's always ability to cheat, always, because we're humans. And what the election code is designed to do is to try to prohibit malarkey going on. And the best way to do that is when it's in public and everyone is watching. You know, a poll watcher, you just need a certificate. You can, the candidate can have, each candidate can have a poll watcher. The party can have a poll watcher. So you can have, you could have 20 poll watchers. We have 1,327 precincts in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, and we can have people standing there and watching the process. And typically, no one is going to cheat when everyone is watching because people will call foul.
Yeah. I could never be a poll watcher because I'd show up with war paint, a shield, and a sword. That being said.
You know, nothing usually happens when there's people there.
Exactly right. Exactly.
When,
and we trust the system. And we trust the system because of it.
Yeah, because, you know, we don't want in America, I know you were joking, but we don't want in America what you just described.
Right.
We want, just like jurors, we want an orderly system with our neighbors in a safe place where people feel confident about what's going on. It's should not be a partisan place. People of both sides can watch, or each side can watch, but we want it just to be Americans voting.
Right.
That's the best way.
Todd.
First of all, thank you for taking the time with us this morning. When you wrote in the winter of 2009 in the Harvard Journal on Legislation, the article, Protecting the Integrity of the Polling Place, a Constitutional Defense of Poll Watcher Statutes, did you have any idea you would be looking forward almost a decade later to the situation we're dealing with in 2020?
Yes. Yes. Because back then, the reason I wrote that, I lectured at Harvard Law, and I was introduced by Elena Kagan before my speech. And then I wrote that article as a result of either in the process of appearing there or afterwards. I can't recall the timing, because there has been a move to away from the public polling place. Vote on the computer, vote by mail. And for 30 years, I've been talking, this is a mistake. I'll give you a kind of a silly example, maybe to you, because it's dated, but it's a real example to me. You know, I'm 62. My grandmother was born before women had the right to vote. I recall in my growing up time, women being told how to vote. They were told by their husbands, you have to vote for this person, this man, and kind of being bullied about how they had to vote. I never wanted a situation in which anyone was bullied about how they chose to vote. when that ballot comes to your home and your family can watch or bully you how you're going to vote, or your employer or your trade organization, or your neighbors, you don't have the sanctity and the privacy to engage in the most precious right we have as Americans, the sanctity and privacy of the voting booth. You can go in there and you can vote your conscience, and you can disagree with your husband. You can vote Democratic if your husband's a Republican, or vice versa. You have that right as an American. And so that article was written because the Sixth Circuit, which is in the area of Cleveland and the eastern part of Ohio, a very liberal federal judge had kicked out all the poll workers. And when you kick out the poll workers, you kick out Americans. You kick out your fellow citizens to watch. And to me, when that happened, that was so dangerous, because our whole system of voting is on everybody watching, not in a menacing way, just everybody watching, because the mere act of watching prohibits people from cheating, because, if they try to, you can call the authorities, you can call the judge.
I know we get into a lot of predictive outcomes, and this might the other question I have, and I know attorneys don't normally do this, right? Especially when they have pending litigation. But as much as you've been involved in election law, the constitutionality of it, moving forward, is this the most consequential time since the founding of this country as it relates to elections, election law, and the Constitution?
Well, that's a big question. I love to read presidential biographies, and we know very little of history because we don't read history anymore. Did you know Rutherford B. Hayes won the presidency by one electoral vote?
No.
This is why we do the show, because it's an educational process. We learn something every show.
So no, I would not venture to say this is the most consequential period of our history in regard to voting. It's an important one. I think it's very important for people to keep a cool head about what's going on, to allow our three branches of government to work. I said this in my Facebook post after I lost my election. I'm human. It was tough to run for 14 months and to not receive as many votes as Mr. Shapiro did. But I said this: the democracy has been in place for 244 years. The democracy is thriving because we're all very engaged. We had more voting this time than any other time. It's important that the democracy survive. Not any particular person, certainly not me or Josh, but it's important that democracy survive. And when we all decided back when we founded this nation that we were going to engage in self-rule, we signed on for messy, very, very messy. If we had a king, it wouldn't be messy. There'd be one decision maker, one decision, and we'd all have to follow it. But when we engage in self-rule, we have problems that arise, and we have to respect the processes and the institutions that we have set up in order for us to live to fight another day. And so I respect the fact of apparently the fact that I have lost, and I will live to fight another day. I care deeply about the country, never going to stop. I'm going to be on guests on important radio shows as long as people will have me, and I will continue to talk about things that are important. But I'm not going to burn down the institutions that I have sworn to uphold.
What was there? Was there any polling done in your race, in the AG race?
Yes.
And how would you characterize that polling vis-a-vis the results?
Completely broken and ridiculous. It was two stories. Two people very close to Mr. Shapiro have indicated to me that he was told he was going to win by as much as 15% and as little as 12%. And when I was winning for 36 hours, he was extraordinarily upset because the polls were wrong. The polls told some of the people that were supporting me that I was also down 12%. Well, I was never probably down 12%. One poll, the Trafalgar Group, which was the only pollster that had accurately predicted that President Trump would win in 2016 in Pennsylvania, predicted that I was 3.5 points down. So he was probably the only one that was right, because it turned out that I lost the race by 4.5 points. So it, I think there's a lot of fault to go around. Our side, repeatedly, I must have been told this by thousands of people, thousands of Republicans. I lie to the pollsters. I want to mess with them. I don't want to tell them the truth. Well, let me tell you the consequences of that when you're a candidate. When you lie to the pollsters and you say, or you don't speak with them, the polling, obviously, information is incorrect, and the funders rely on the polling data. And so they become reticent to fund your race because of the polling data. And because the polling data was wrong for Josh, I'm sure he got a lot more money from people who said that he was for sure going to win. So I think there's blame on our side by not being honest with the pollsters. It really doesn't help Republican candidates. And I think there's enormous amount of blame on the polling side. I think they sell this notion that they're a science, and I don't think they can be a science because the data is just incorrect.
Any questions?
Hey, Rob, again.
Yep, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I just have one last question. Thank you so much again for being here. It sounds like a lot of the problems we see with this election, in my estimation, have to do with us not being constantly vigilant to protect our elections. And so it seems like the strategy of this court decision was, oh, you should have filed a suit earlier. And it seems that you're suggesting there's a problem of we only have 35 days after the election to collect evidence. So can you speak on the importance of, a lot of people just want to think about elections every presidential year. What is the importance of maintaining that vigilance, even in times when we're not voting, when we see things like orders being passed that change the way we vote, and filing lawsuits at that point and speaking up at that point to prevent the election day scenario that we're seeing?
Good question. What I've been saying to everyone is to contact your state rep, contact your state senator, and tell them you don't like mail-in voting, that you want that eventually removed from the law in Pennsylvania. Not because you're backward, not because you're Republican, not because you're old school, but because the chain of custody, it's too impossible to ensure the validity of millions and millions of ballots.
Easy to subvert.
And so, I just, we require jurors to go to court and listen to juries. Okay. I mean, to trials. We need to go in person to vote.
Couple of things that I have for you. What was the criminality on the Nader Kerry thing? Why did these people go to jail?
Yeah. So what happened was the state legislators enlisted state state employees to look at these Ralph Nader papers. So they had them doing political work on state time.
On state time. Okay. And in your opinion, give me your very best example to delineate a concept that I think a lot of people are confused by. What is the difference between voter fraud and illegal votes?
Well, that's the same.
Okay.
So the difference between
I'm an operator, like the alleged video in Georgia. Okay. What stops me? And obviously this would be illegal, right? If I take a blank ballot and I fill it out, straight Democratic ticket, and I run it through the machine, well, it's December 5th, and in some precincts in New York, the vote isn't in yet, and in California. So we're going 4 weeks and 4 days. And I run that ballot 12 hours a day for 4 weeks and 4 days.
That's clear voter fraud.
Okay.
That's done. The vote in that case, the voter fraud is being done by an election administration worker, but that's clear voter fraud. Or when you have a precinct, let's just use our side as an example. Let's say you had a precinct with all Republicans, you didn't have one Democratic registered voter, and you had a situation where there was 100% voting.
Mhm.
When in most elections, in most primaries, you're seeing 33% to 40% voting. And in that case, you have 100% of the people voting.
Right.
Well, your senses are raised. Wait a minute, how did this one precinct with no registered voters of any other party have 100% turnout?
Right.
Those are the kind of things that you look at where you suspect fraud.
Right. So there were precincts in Philadelphia and Atlanta and in Detroit that had in the hundreds of percentages of overcounts.
Here's
right?
the big thing you didn't ask me about that I think is very problematic. Can I offer this?
Sure.
Okay. So Mark Zuckerberg, the chairman or president of Facebook, donated $300 million for the governmental organizations to initiate these satellite voting places.
Right.
So the state found that these were not voting places. So the place where there was voting taking place was not a voting place. Therefore, there was no poll workers allowed. Now, also, the folks who engage in election administration in Philadelphia decided that these mobile units would go down democratically controlled streets where there's, nearly 98% registered Democratic voters, and park the van in these streets and have people come out, register to vote by mail, get a ballot, vote by mail, and then no poll workers. Now, here's my beef with all that. If the money goes to a governmental entity and that governmental entity decides we're going to have that mobile van on 50 streets in which there's 80% Republicans and 50 streets where there's 80% Democrats, okay. But when that governmental entity is taking that mobile van, the governmental entity in conspiracy with Zuckerberg is engaging in get out the vote efforts, which is a
Right.
partisan activity.
Right. And
I think that's illegal.
And was that something that was in the draft that Giuliani had in front of Brann?
I wonder.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. So the next question that I had for you is, and I'm sorry, I'm with you. I'm completely with you. Top 3 favorite presidential bios.
Well, my favorite president is President Lincoln.
Me too.
So I've probably read 50 books about President Lincoln. One of my favorites is by Donald White, who's a PhD. He's a theologian as well as a history professor.
Mhm.
And he takes Lincoln's 4 great speeches, Gettysburg, second inaugural, first inaugural, and I think the Lyceum, I can't remember. And he dissects each of the speeches word for word and tries to figure out where the words come from Lincoln based on Lincoln's other speeches. So, and I'm reading another book by the same author about, for nerds, there's a controversy about whether Lincoln's best speech was Gettysburg Address or the second inaugural. My
Right.
favorite is the Gettysburg, but I'm
Right.
reading a book about the derivation of every word from the second inaugural address. So if that didn't just nerd you out, nothing.
Well, the second inaugural is an awesome speech, but I'm with you on both counts. And your top third favorite bio?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm reading a book right now by, his name is going to escape me. He wrote the biography of Theodore Roosevelt, the 3-part series. And I'm reading the biography of Theodore Roosevelt after he left the presidency, which is, I just didn't know a lot about Theodore Roosevelt. But I mean, he's unbelievable, he, investigating the river in Brazil and all of that and almost dying. I mean,
Wait a minute.
I just didn't realize he was such a genius.
Wait a minute, Heather, you buried the lead. He got shot, and an hour later, he did an hour and a half speech.
Right, exactly.
With a bullet in him. No,
right.
I ain't going to the hospital. I mean, come on, there are some things that I think are quintessentially American that has got to be at the top of the list of them.
Yeah.
Anyway, our next guest is coming up. Heather, thank you so very much for coming on. We will definitely invite you back to be a guest on the show to talk about presidential biographies or favorite presidents or anything that has to do with politics and or love of America. We owe you a debt of gratitude, and thank you very much for being a patriot.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.
Rob, so you know that the great Tiberius D is on board right now. Why don't you quickly introduce him?
Sure. So, as you all know, I do a lot of streaming on different platforms. One of those platforms is twitch.tv, and I met Tiberius D on there, who hosts political discussions, and he is one of the best pollsters and election analysts that we've found. He came on, was a friend of the show, came on the night before the election for our 24-hour special and gave his predictions, which were very, very accurate and had very good reasoning behind them. So we thought that we would have him back on today to talk about it. So everyone, welcome Tiberius D. Thanks for being here, man.
I appreciate it.
Yes, on that overnight of the 24-hour Trump rally that we hosted on our channel is when I got to meet Tiberius D, and I became instantly a huge fan. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm a little tired. I was working on the new podcast material last night, and I stayed up a little too late doing that. But outside of that, I'm doing all right. There's certain things I'm looking at that I'm proud of myself. I called Texas and Florida almost to the letter, but there's a few states out there that I didn't call at all, and I'm just kind of still beating myself up for that a little bit.
Well, there's always room for being better. But I guess the place where I would like to start with our conversation with you is the legal side aside. Okay. Give us your thoughts with respect to how different what surprised you the most about this election? Was it the numbers, or was it the different subsections of voters that came out? Give us the 2 or 3 most significant things that you were like, whoa.
Oh yeah, there's so many highlight reels that I could pull out in this election, and it's something to behold. Number one is just how powerful mail-in ballots were. Is that we saw with the rural vote in particular that Trump pulled it out on a level I'd never before seen, and even with all the things stacked against him, he put up the second highest voter turnout in history as far for a presidential candidate, with Biden being first. And Biden would have never have had that without mail-in ballots. So just the power that has alone is incredible. The power that Trump had whenever they pulled it out in the rural parts, and they showed up to the polls in COVID, which just blew my mind. I called the numbers to a level I thought it'd be around 150 million votes. It looks like we're going somewhere around 155 when it's all said and done. I'm still trying to keep the math because it's still going up somehow. Almost what is it, 3 weeks after the election? So that looks kind of bad, actually. One of the big highlight rules is that we had states counting days after, when yet we had other states that had their results largely certified and in with 98% of the vote in within an hour or two. Texas, Florida, Ohio, Iowa, they did really, really great. But then there was these other states that completely screwed the pooch. You had Michigan was done the next day, but it was late that next day. Wisconsin was done at like 1:30 in the morning, or at least, I think it was like 1:33 or 2 o'clock in the morning whenever it got done for me. But then Pennsylvania was counting days later, Arizona was counting days later, Nevada was counting days later. So some people need to get their act together.
Right. What was the other things that jump out at you other than that?
Okay.
Anything nerdy or geeky that you would appreciate, but the rest of us might miss?
I might have missed it myself. We'll have to see.
Well, let me ask you this. This was something that I saw that I thought you were fantastic with, which you've been talking a lot about sort of the realignment of the political parties. And there were some things out of this election that I thought were very interesting that I'd like to get your thoughts on. One of them was I saw a chart that showed the wealthiest counties in the country. And just 20 to 30 short years ago, over 90% of them were voting red, were voting with the Republicans. That number appears to be 53 to 55% for Democrats now. Is that a trend you see continuing, that wealthier counties and wealthier Americans are more migrating to the Democratic Party?
I can't speak exactly for wealthy counties as in, like, are we talking like GDP for the county, or if we're talking about the average wealth per county? I don't know what metric you're going here with.
Yeah, right. I think it was the average wealth per county was the chart I saw.
Yeah. Okay, if that's the case, if that's the case, it actually is going with what I'm seeing right now. I predicted for a while, and it really seems to be coming true with this election, that labor and business are flipping parties. It looks to a large degree that Wall Street, and particularly a lot of just big business in general, is now supporting what is known as the corporate Democrats. Whether you like that or not, it's up to you. Unions look to be largely, and trades workers are largely looking to be moving into the Republican ticket. I thought they would go 50%. According to the exit polls, it's around 45, but I've heard numbers as high as 58% out of somewhere of Ohio, but I've never been able to validate that, but I keep getting told that number. What it definitely looks like to me is that I've got that trend right. There's a few other trends that I'm still trying to nail down. I definitely undershot something like BLM. I thought people would be a little bit more anti that, and it looks to be about a 60-40 split instead of like an 80-20 split.
Again, assuming that like everything is legit, all claims of fraud and stuff aside, do you see with something like Black Lives Matter, or maybe kind of what would be considered the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party, the fact that they were able to win the presidency, but it looks like down ballot that they struggled? Do you think that this was more of a referendum on those progressive ideals being the future of the Democratic Party that'll be successful, or more of a referendum on just people didn't really like Trump, but kind of still don't like that more radical progressivism?
That's a great question. And the long story in this short is that it's really hard to tell. If you look at what is known as more the progressive candidates that were across the board, the ones that were a little bit more left, particularly the ones that advocated for healthcare, tended to win their swing state, or not their swing state, but their election gambits, versus the ones that didn't, largely lost. Now, whether that's because they were offering something on the plate, or if they were left enough that they actually looked attractive, I can't tell you that exactly. What I can tell you is this, is that seems conflictory with Biden as a whole, because Biden's kind of the milquetoast guy. Like, the entire point of the reason Biden was up for president was, when you are the big tent party, you have to make somebody who doesn't make everyone mad. And that's Biden in the Democratic Party. We'll see who ends up replacing him. That's really contrary to the average voter on it when you go down ticket. Is that down ticket, it looked to be that they were going more left, even in the areas that were closer. And the areas that were closer that had more moderate candidate, they usually lost. So I'm trying to figure out exactly like where like leftism or these more progressive candidates can really, really win, and where they can't. I thought they wouldn't do very well here in the Midwest, and for a large degree they didn't. But most of the progressive candidates didn't run in the Midwest. They ran in either Florida or like weird states, like red states, that they actually pulled one out. I think there was one that was plus 10 in a district. But the long story short is most of them are still coming out of states that are more blue wall states, particularly like more suburban districts of New York and Pennsylvania, but I'd have to bring up on my data analytics, which I don't have right now.
Just last question, then I'll pass it off to Todd here. I know that you probably don't have a definitive answer to this, but just kind of your gut feeling. Something you said there kind of triggered a gut feeling that I had, which was, do you think that the most popular progressive issue is probably healthcare? I mean, I think that maybe there's a lot of stuff that's being offered by people like AOC that average Americans wouldn't necessarily be for, but I do think that a lot of Americans want the healthcare problem solved, and maybe that's an appealing message that people are willing to vote for the progressives on that issue alone.
I'm going to admit my bias here, and that is this: is that I number one, I firmly believe that healthcare is the second biggest issue. If you look at pretty much every opinion poll, whether you had COVID factored into that or not, is that healthcare is the second biggest issue on top of the economy itself. And a level it overrides, because that's how people, that's the number one reason that people declare bankruptcy in the United States. So separating this out, my bias aside, is that I actually looked at the Democrats on that one issue better than I did. And remember, I voted for Trump, but when it comes to the Democrats, they actually have a plan, even if some of them are more lackluster than others. The Republicans are really struggling to get out a plan that really shows how well they're doing, or shows something concrete that they can offer. I've heard repeal and replace, but what is replace? They're not marketing that well if they even have it. I haven't heard anything personally, and that's giving the Democrats a massive edge on that one issue.
Well, and Ed, I totally agree with you. Bernie Sanders had a platform in the last 5 years in this country, because he took that one single core idea of how unfair it was for people to be broke and shattered and had to commit bankruptcy because of medical expenses. He took that one single idea, Tiberius, and for 30 years ran for it until it actually bore fruit in 2015, and that's the platform that he had, that unfairness as pushback. And it's a question, because I've thought about it a little bit, but is the fact that the Republicans don't have a plan is because they believe that government shouldn't be involved in it?
To some degree, it definitely looks that to be the case. Although whenever you have the situation that we have now, that doesn't look tenable, is basically how I'll put it.
Where would you start if we brought in Tiberius D? If Carlos Saldivia and Rob Nader had a guy that could talk to you about it in the government, and they paid you a $2 million fee for your opinion, where would you start the conversation with respect to having a Republican-like health care plan, I should say?
Sure. I want to divide this real quick, because we were talking about the party realignment, and that is, I think that's going to fundamentally change how the Republicans start approaching stuff. They might be a lot more in favor here in the next couple of years when it comes to dealing with working families on being a little bit more economically, quote unquote, left. Whether you like that or not, that's up to you guys, but I think it will help you with voters very, very well. If I'm talking right now under the still guise of the Republican Party that is more hands-off economically, I don't know if this is either like a 20 IQ take or a 200 IQ take, but this is what I throw out, is that the biggest problem I have seen is insurance, not the healthcare providers itself, but the insurance. And if you look at how this system works, the issue tends to be that if I'm a Hoosier, right? I can't go to Pennsylvania and get health insurance. I can't even go to the state next to me, Illinois, and get health insurance. I only have the insurance that is provided in Indiana.
Right.
That has made legalized monopolies in all 50 states.
Right. No competition.
There's no competitions. There's nothing there that's going to give a quality control or price control. Now, do I think that'll solve everything? No, but here's the big IQ take. If it is that we need to have a federal tort reform system using the Interstate Commerce Clause that overrides all 50 states on healthcare, so that you can have health insurance across the board in all 50 states, that you can buy. If you're a Hoosier, you can buy from Illinois, you can buy from Pennsylvania, you can buy from anywhere. I think that would break the doors on a lot of the issues that we've seen. It's worth a shot. I don't know if the lawyers will let it go.
Right. And of course, that's always the primordial question is, once the lawyers start getting involved and once the lobbyists start getting involved because of the money, COVID, anyone, it changes the equation. And listen, with respects, as an example, not to get off the road, but as an example, when the people that are making the lockdowns, Tiberius, don't have any risk at all of not working and not having a paycheck coming in, okay? If those are the people that are making the lockdown, of course it's easy for them to judge and decide that that's what's going to be the law, because it's no skin off their ass. They're not losing any money. They're not losing any income. Their business aren't being shuttered. So the same thing with healthcare. If there's so much money trying to convince a U.S. senator to look the other way and not act, it's almost kind of like the same thing. It's all about the money. Now, let's set aside the healthcare just for a second. I've been asking a lot of people, what is the number one most attractive policy position that Joe Biden had? And you know what everyone, by and large, has asked me, and I've made sure that I've asked people that were 50 and under, okay? Because I kind of know what people 50 or over say. It's almost like a joke. You're asking me that Joe Biden has a policy position for 50-year-olds or older, okay? But they said, you know what they said? The college for the loan forgiveness. Listen. I don't see Republicans even politicking on the base of saying, yeah, we want government to come in and get in the middle of private contracts, right?
There's a long and a short that I can go down this. When it comes to the whole how well Biden's doing with loan forgiveness, it impacts a lot of Americans, particularly that are 45 and younger. Let's just be honest here.
Right, of course.
So it's going to have some kind of attraction to it. Personally, I don't think it's going to be as good as they think it is, because they're largely seriously. Like,
you're being cynical, sure. Yes, but
no, it's not even this. It's not even the cynic. It's that I did the analysis because this has been a big conversation on the show, and people keep asking me. It's like, hey, what's your take? And the long and the short of it is that those more like middle quintile Americans that actually went to college, that finished up their degree, but they're not really in that really good income spot to really wipe it out. Those folks look to be they'll be helped. They'll be able to increase their consumer spending. They'd be able to do, be able to pay off their other debts and kind of get their ball rolling a little quicker for themselves. But the people I think it's actually really going to help is the people that don't really need the help, but will take it. People that are in that higher income bracket, that like center top income bracket, that still have the income or the student loans. They're just paying them off as they deal with them. You wipe that out and they're just going to go to town, and they'll largely be that more higher class capitalistic people that will be able to go, oh, okay, I can put this into my Roth IRA or my 401k or my mutual fund or anything like that. You're going to see a wealth disparity actually probably increase from that piece of policy position.
Right. So Tiberius, is it cynical to say that part of this plan is to cater specifically to those people who can afford it? And just for a second, big tech, finance, and Wall Street. I heard someone on Twitter say the other day something fantastic. And that was, these are the people that are voting for Biden, but are hoping that he loses because they want Trump, and what Trump has done with the economy to continue. Isn't that a very funny take on it?
I definitely see what they're seeing on this one. And the problem of this is I can't tell exactly where the Democrats are going with this. Number one, they're still the big tent party, so they have a lot of constituents that they can particularly target. And they're also, it looks like Biden's trying to pull back unions, but we'll see how well that goes. What I am seeing, though, is that Biden has reasons to do student loan forgiveness, particularly for both higher income Americans and lower income Americans. And it can play to either one of them. And he could easily use the PR for either one of them. But if I'm correct, this is actually something that will galvanize the more rich elite folks, as people like to refer to it, into the Democratic Party. I don't know if they're planning on doing that. That's the thing I can't tell. Is this an active, hey, we think it's going to do this for the poor folks or for the middle income folks, and we're doing it for that reason? Or is it something under the table? It's like, yeah, we really like these business libertarians flooding into our party. Let's use them to kick out the progressives. I can't tell if someone's playing 5D chess here.
So,
Todd, I wanted to see if Todd had any questions.
I do. You've mentioned the two biggest issues, right? The economy and then healthcare. Where do you see COVID in the current situation where we have higher numbers now than when we shut the economy down right back in the spring? Where do you see that now, and how is it playing a role in what you had mentioned before?
I'm glad you asked. Unfortunately, I'm going to take my humble pie here and eat it. And that was, I think I really underestimated the impact of COVID, particularly in Wisconsin. I think that's what flipped it back blue, is that they're having a massive COVID issue before the election where everyone else has really kept it okay, but now it's getting out of control. If you consider COVID part of healthcare, it actually might have beat out the economy this year as far as the number one issue. If you consider COVID an issue all to itself, it was issue number 3. That's largely going with opinion polls, but it looks like from everything that I've seen where the chips fell on election day, assuming everything's legit, that's probably, as far as an issue wise, number 3. It looks like about 20% of the population voted, particularly just on how the COVID was handled. Hi, buddy.
So to that point,
I mean,
how are you seeing that play out, where you had a lot of blue state governors send COVID positive patients back into nursing homes and then lay that catastrophic mistake at the president's feet that it was his fault?
I see what you're getting at, and
the other side, right?
Yeah, I really thought COVID was going to be a split. Is that people who were largely supporting Democrats would stay Democrat, and people who are supporting Republicans largely would stay Republicans. It's amazing how and where things moved. Can you leave me alone for a second, buddy? Sorry, I guys got dogs. I know Carlos has had his going off there for a quick minute. Anyway, as far as where COVID is gone, I really thought that would actually maybe help Trump in certain areas, because for as many people that are unfortunately dealing with complications of COVID because it's spreading, you're also seeing people that are literally going crazy sitting in their houses, or they don't have an income or whatever. And I really thought it would be just a split draw, but it looks to be something on the order that a lot more people were critical of Trump's handling of COVID rather than just the fact that it has seriously bad economic and social consequences. And that blew my mind. I did not see that coming. So I'm still trying to work my way into the thoughts of a lot of those people, because I don't get it. I really don't. And whether that's, on me or not, I'll take it. But I'm still shocked at how that particular issue turned out when it came to Election Day.
Yeah, and we will really not know exactly how much of an issue it is. In my mind, I just, with the vaccine and with the fact that, some of these governors in these Democratic states have literally fumbled the ball and at the 5-yard line, then kicked the ball through the end zone for a touchback. It's just awful. That being said, I have to ask you, and please forgive me.
No, it's fine.
Your honest thoughts about what happened in the election vis-a-vis voting irregularities. Are you alarmed by some of the stories that you're hearing?
Am I alarmed by some of the stories I'm hearing? Yes. The problem is that can I validate some of the stories we're hearing? A great example, somebody threw up something in my community just yesterday. It was a video about 12 minutes long, and it was going over voting counting in Atlanta, and it had a whole voting station supposedly where people were there. Everyone got ran out, and they were supposed to be done, but all of a sudden 4 people were still there, and they were counting votes 2 hours later. There's so many problems with this as far as just oversight, how things are run. I'm eagerly waiting to see what the illegal beagles and the lawyers do when it comes to this. As far as me, of course, there's so many things that look fishy, and particularly in the states that it came down to: Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan. I'm not going to say that things don't look fishy and things don't need to be investigated. I think everyone would benefit from that, whether you believe that it was rigged or not. On the other side of this is that, can I believe that Joe Biden won? Yeah. If I'm believing the breakdown of where the votes went, is that we saw a lot of split ticket votes, and it looks like the Never Trump Republicans showed up and they said, hey, I'm voting Biden, and then I'm Republican largely down ticket. And we saw that in Maine, and we particularly saw that in Georgia. And so for me, I've got this real Schrodinger's cat analogy thing going on. It's like, yes, we were really good. We rigged the vote, so we got rid of the president, but we lost House seats. I'm just like, huh?
Right. And the very best thing that you said on the 24-hour digital thing, that when you came on and we first met, is I brought up the fact that I could not understand how Wisconsin and Michigan and Washington and Oregon would vote more blue or at the same level. And you said the greatest thing I've heard and I've run with since you said it. It's because we don't know how to talk to those people. And that's why we lost there. Can you expand on that idea? On Republicans not knowing how to talk to communities that are distressed. And I don't know if you saw that video. I know that Rob is probably going to bring it up later, of this woman in Santa Monica yesterday, just begging for help because of her restaurant. Did you see that video?
I personally didn't see that video, but I'll repeat.
Have you heard about it?
I don't think I have.
All right. So there's a woman that did a 2-minute video where they closed her down for outdoor seating, and literally across the alley from where her restaurant is, they set up something like 8 or 10 tents for a movie shoot where people could gather and eat literally across the alley from her. They can operate, but she can't. And she was literally in tears begging for help because Garcetti and Newsom, have put these lockdown situations in place where she can't operate, and she's going to lose everything she's worked for her entire life. How can we not know how to talk to those people, Tiberius?
I'm going to largely repeat what I said when I was here last time, and then we can kind of go down the road with this one. And that is this. When you live in an urban setting, particularly one that is population density locked, and that is something like SeaTac, that is San Francisco, Los Angeles isn't there yet, but it's really getting there, New York City. When you're in these very dense, very urban cores, is that you have to operate differently. When you're out in the rural, folks, when you're out in the sticks, is that, the cops are 20 minutes away. You probably carry a gun just out of precedence, right? And there's no one really there to help you. I mean, we have our communities, we have our societies, but the big difference is that if you're a more rural voter or a more rural person like myself, is that we operate very independently because we largely have to. But when you're in an urban setting, you have to operate completely differently. You're literally body stacked on top of body, and this is literally skyscrapers, right? You have to build up. And the problem that innately entails is that you have to operate differently, from distribution to your general politics, top down, left or right, is that you have to be different. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to word that. There's some things about urbanites that I really, really respect and I really like, but there's things that I completely just go, what are you doing? And that in itself is kind of what I'm getting at here, is that Republicans have definitely moved into being a very rural party, or are still doing so. And it's showing that they're communicating to that crowd really, really well, but they're losing all touch with the cities, and vice versa. The Democrats can't talk to rural people, and that used to be some of their best voters. Whether that's good or bad, I'll leave to you. But it looks like now that geographically, the parties will be locked between an urban party and a rural party. The suburbs will be the swing area that will actually dictate who wins elections.
So one of the things we kind of hit on election fraud. One of the things that I've been saying to my audience is, if we set aside questions of election day fraud, there are questions that I have on whether or not the election was unfairly tipped the scale one direction. The mainstream media, academia, the entertainment, the tech industries, all kind of pushing Joe Biden. So as someone who does election forecast, when you're talking to people and when you're researching kind of the issues that matter for why people vote, do you think that sometimes the framing of the narrative is actually more important than the reality of what the issues are?
On a level here, I think you're right. And I'm not sure if I'm saying this in the way that you want to, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bill Maher, who runs Real Time over in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But I think he actually put it very, very well. And he was he's very, very critical of the Democrats on a lot of issues.
Mm-hmm.
And he put it this way. He was talking just after the election. He's like, how is it that the average American can look at a Democratic voter and say, yeah, we like Trump because they hate Trump. That's, whatever. Yeah, we like Trump more than you, or we like this more than you. And he talked about how you have people that are known as the SJWs or whatever, or that woman who's in the parking lot, apologizing to their kid that's screaming at them with the Hillary bumper sticker on the back. Is that issues are one thing to themselves, but there is definitely kind of a cult of the optics thing developing. And I'm having a lot of trouble coming full circle with this, but it really looks like this. A lot of the voters are now moving from at least just direct issues into principles of operation. We've talked about that with the urban versus rural divide, but it also seems to be a very ethical divide, is that Republicans are largely embracing personal responsibility and individualism, versus the Democrats look to be embracing some kind of communitarianism. And this is where I'm going to punch on them, is that there's the cult of the woke, the helping out the underprivileged, that kind of thing, is that they literally prop people up for being disenfranchised, and they give them more weight and they give them more voice. That can help you really, really well in politics because it makes people want to vote for you, but it really makes you look bad whenever the people that are, representing you as a whole out there in the real world are people that are, questionable, to say the least. People that are, oh yes, I want to be my best friend to my kid, not be their parent. That kind of thing. It looks.
Or I want to fly to Cabo under lockdowns and spend, 4 days with my family without wearing masks. Yes, it comes off bad.
Yeah. So at least for me on that particular part is, I definitely see a breakdown where regardless of the issue, there's just a leaning towards who are the people that I'm siding with. And I'm seeing a lot more of that kind of thinking, more of a team aspect thinking that is taking hold. Now, I don't know if that's going to be standard or not, because we're seeing people move. I don't know if that's part of just our evolution and how we think about the issues, or if this is just part of the anomaly as we're in the middle of the realignment. Keep in mind, we're in year 4 or 5 of this right now.
Right.
So you gotta wait.
I have two more questions. The first one is, listen, I don't think I'm better than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm more moral than anyone else. The only person I want to be more moral than is, I want to be more moral tomorrow than I am today of myself. So when I told you that I asked people, and I'm center right, okay, on policy I'm pretty, conservative. I'm very conservative. on social issues, I tend to be very liberal. You know, I am the same man that raised a gay son, and the other son is a scout sniper in the Marine Corps. And if you mess with my gay son, my Marine Corps son is going to blow the ass off a gnat at 3,000 meters. That's the guy you're going to have to deal with. That being said, I don't know my polar opposite. And what I mean by that is that I said to you that I believe that it's important to know what the very best policy position that Joe Biden has. I don't know my polar opposite, center left, that would even care what the very best policy that Donald Trump has. In the spirit of the greatest thing I've ever heard you say is not knowing how to talk to these voters in Minnesota, and how do I talk to these people? How do I do my civic duty in maintaining an objective, open channel of conversation when they don't care to talk about what the most important policy position that Donald Trump has ever had? And we could have an argument, Tiberius, about what kind of man he is. But like I said in my opening this morning, I really feel that Donald Trump is the man that's standing between our constitutional republic and total complete anarchy.
I get what you're saying. Personally, I thought Donald Trump was the better pick, so there's my bias out for the listeners, which we covered. You
get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. There's a lot I could go down in with this personally. Is that when it comes to talking to that people that you can kind of consider like your ideological opposite on the Democratic Party, it's really hard to pin that down. I'm not super familiar with what your personal takes are, but it sounds more that you're part of like the libertarian right, which if that's the case, I'm
on some issues. Yeah, I'm libertarian on, and everyone I know, it thinks I'm crazy. But we've been voting, and I know it's a bigger issue now, especially with this election. But for years and years and years, I said that voter ID is a step too far. I'm sorry, that's what I believe. Okay, signature, signature, match the signatures. If you can replicate my signature, you got the vote, baby. But you know what? Can't do that on same-day registration because you have nothing to go against. That being said, okay, I'm not a crazy libertarian. I believe in wearing a mask and going into a private place that asks you, please wear a mask. Please wear shoes and a t-shirt when you come into our business. I respect that. I'm not a whacked out libertarian. I'm not a sovereign, not even close. Mm-hmm. We're all in it together. Does anyone realize that? We're all in it together. We're never going to escape, alone. We're all going to have the same ending. So how do we talk to these people what would be your best ideas on how to be able to open up a dialogue? Because we're never going to get out of this, and we're not going to solve it without each other, the yin and the yang.
I get what you're asking, and there's a level here where I can kind of equate to that because the way that you answered how you kind of view the world is in a way very similar that I would. And so I'm probably in a general sense with you on this. The problem that I have is that depending on who we're talking about in the Democratic Party, if we're talking about liberals, I get along with liberals very, very well. If we're talking about people who are like, yeah, I like capitalism. Yeah, I like, having most of the systems that we have now. I just want, either they want social liberty in the terms of they think that the transgender community is getting railroaded, or if it's just like, hey, look, I want to push social safety nets a little bit further. Communicating with them is not hard for me personally. I don't know about for you. Largely the thing is that we just disagree on like which policies really, really are effective, particularly when it comes to social safety nets being poverty traps in certain regards. Mm. That's the issue I have when talking to them is just I get hung up on economic details, but economic training.
Right.
if we're talking progressives, I mean, these are, at least in my opinion, far left candidates. And I'm not going to punch that, is that we need people like that that are going to question and push the envelope to that direction. The same that we have far right candidates that will push the envelope that direction. It's a balancing factor. Talking to them is extremely hard for me. Part of it is in the way that I think their ethical framework is far, far different than mine personally, is that while my policies actually on paper are quite a bit liberal, my personal ethic is very much conservative. I believe that you are not entitled to respect. You have to earn that, which I think is one of these massive differences between the average right winger and the average left winger, is that the average left winger believes that everyone's entitled to some modicum of respect at the get-go. I don't believe that. I've never was raised that way. And I think it actually works better. It's like, look, you treat people with manners, but you know, you're no one until you validate yourself. Do you have credentials? Do you behave well, you know, in public? That kind of thing. That's, at least in my mind, a more right-wing ethic. So when talking about these far left candidates, or we're talking about these far left people, is that I just don't have any room to stand on when it comes to talking to them. When it comes to ethics, they want pretty much everything that I don't. On a large state, they're more concerned with equity, and I mean that equity, than they are opportunity. And I'm just, whether they realize it or not, and people say I punch down on them or strawman them, that's fine. I don't know if it's that I'm just not looking at them in a favorable light, or if they really just don't realize what they're actually advocating for. But either which way, from my personal perspective and viewpoint, is that conversation simply goes nowhere, because they want things that are so much out of my purview that I can't agree with them on 90% of the issues.
And that's why I asked.
If I could just add real quick, and then Tiberius probably has to get going here, so we'll finish up with the last question. But yeah, I know that you've had a similar experience with me, and we'll give you a chance to kind of let people know where they can see you. But on Twitch, which is where I found you, it's overwhelmingly younger left-wing people that are discussing politics. Some of them are some of the coolest people you'll ever meet. But I think that you've had a similar experience with me when talking about it. There are often times where I'll disagree with someone who's more right-wing than me, and we go away saying, oh, okay, fair enough, we have some disagreements. Oftentimes, though, there are people on the left that are so vitriolic that even if you approach it with manners, it quickly devolves into them saying, well, you're an immoral person, whereas we're saying, well, we disagree with you. And I think that, see what you think about this, it stems from something you said that I've been commenting on that I think is very important, which is the idea that it seems that we're shifting from, a lot of people on the right are advocating individual and personal responsibility, whereas on the left, a lot of people seem to be advocating more of a collectivism mindset. And along with that mindset comes the idea, we know better than you, and if you disagree with us, you're immoral. Therefore, we could force things upon you. And I think that's my best guess where some of this, I mean, I'll go on and have a conversation with people, and within 5 minutes, I just think it's a conversation about capitalism versus socialism. And I'm being told by 100 people in a chat and the person I'm discussing it with, you're an evil person. You don't care about the future of this world. You're a greedy capitalist. We don't really have that reaction with them. We're just like, wow, let's hear what you have to say, even if we disagree. So, I mean, have you had that experience too, where, look, I know it sounds biased to the audience, but I could just say that in my anecdotal experience, when I disagree with people on the right versus when I disagree with someone on the left, I see more of that animus coming from the left, really disliking me as opposed to just disagreeing with me.
I've definitely had that experience personally, and it just depends on where I go, where I get my experiences. When it comes to right-wingers in general, I'll tag right-wingers and left-wingers here, is that when I encounter the far right, or when I encounter a right-wing echo chamber, it's largely like on Facebook. And if that's the case, the right can be absolutely vitriolic and toxic as well. So let's not act like they're saints by any question. So on that level, there's definitely problems there. And what I tend to have with those people is that they, at least from what I've seen, have developed very, what I would consider far right tendencies, where they pretty much look at the far left and they've developed a very reactionary response to it. It's just, wow, these people are nuts. They've got to be kind of put down or whatever. And they develop tendencies that I would actively call fascistic. And I'm not throwing that out there because, that's thrown around all the time now, is that if you kind of read history, that whole thing about, putting people in a corner, I'm not talking about a race thing, but on an ideological level, is that they are being prompted into right-wing reactionary extremism because they're seeing where the left is going, and they see it as an abomination. And I can understand that as a person who has a right-wing ethic. Shift it over to the left.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll happily punch on the left here, is that when it comes to Twitter in particular, or Twitch in particular, is that there's a lot of toxic people on there, and that, they will lord their morality, over you. They think that if you're not for equity, then you're a bad person. And on a level, I actually kind of get that. That's part of their moral axioms. They believe in the community. They believe in having a system that is cohesive together. They don't believe in diversity in outcome. And that is at least antithetical to my values. And so when they say that, I just kind of walk it off, and I'm like, all right, cool. I mean, I think you're a bad person too. Do we want to have a bad faith conversation, or do we want to keep rolling forward? I have some success with these people, but not a lot. The biggest thing that helps me is I actually know economics. And so I can drop some hard bombs. They love to talk about how the global South was destroyed by imperialism and how we've extracted all these resources. And I just kind of drop these bombs here, and I go, all right, look, I'm not going to say imperialism hasn't hurt some people. Let's just be honest here. But what really that we're talking about here, and some people find this very put down, is that if not for certain forms of imperialism, or if you even talk about the American empire just allowing people to access capital across the planet, is that none of these places would ever develop. Right. It's not their fault. It's not. It is actually the biggest thing that limits your ability to generate capital is your geography. You have to have a geography that helps ease that, and that's largely by transportation. So you need either a river system that you can float something on, or you need large flat land that allows you to move with ease, and that's a really easy way to generate capital. If you look at the global South, they don't have that, or at least not to remotely the degree that the Northern Hemisphere does. And so they were always been on the back foot. And if you look at history, India compared to Europe,
I was just going to bring that up,
has been incredibly poor. It has a huge population density, particularly in the Ganges Valley, because it's a double crop area, but it's really hard to float anything the size of a barge on the Ganges River, because you have 4 months of flooding monsoon and 8 months of semi-arid dryness that makes it go from flood state to barely enough to float a dinghy on. And so India's history, even though if you put it all together has been one of the richest civilizations throughout history, is actually, until the modern era, they've been starving every year, even in their golden age. China has the same problem.
Right.
Europe, to a large degree, had that issue until the Industrial Revolution. And then we largely walked away from that. Bringing industry, bringing the technological revolutions in India and China has allowed them to do that. But it was Europe's innovations, because of its geography, and particularly North America as well, tagged into that allowed for that. And it's basically technological and economic diffusion. Without empire, you don't get that. And I'm serious. This is the thing that we hard disagree with these more leftist candidates and these more leftist leaning people, is that they think that these people can freely develop and they're absolutely as capable on their own. The people are, absolutely. Their geography is not. And that means that I firmly believe that the global South will be poor forever compared to the global North, unless there is a absolute massive way that we change our economic structures and our geopolitical institutions.
That's an incredible analysis there. One of the things that I wanted to mention with respect to the things that the hard left and the hard right have in common is their utter ignorance. That's one of the things that they share, is their utter ignorance. Okay, whether it be the hard right believing, the Q nonsense that they talk, or the hard left pulling down statues of Frederick Douglass. Okay. So, the ignorance is just, that's what binds them together. And, but do you have a good example of a precinct or a state or any situation where Joe Biden was way ahead at 11 o'clock at night on election day, and then at 6 o'clock in the morning or a day later, he won by 7 points? That'd be Trump. Trump winning by 7 points.
Yeah, that definitely didn't happen.
The polar opposite of what happened in 7 different states.
Yeah, Biden's gain with the states that counted their early ballots last was astonishing, and particularly your guys' state, Pennsylvania, blew my mind. Trump was up. What was it, 800,000 votes or like 700,000 votes? Can't remember that number.
750,000 plus.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden he loses by 150,000. When I thought that the election had been wrapped up that night, and I went to bed. I'm just like, all right, cool. Trump's got it in the bag. And then I woke up and they're like, oh, hey, like we're still counting votes. There's a lot to be counted. I'm like, all right, what in the world's going on here? The thing that got me in particular was I looked at the tweet from the governor of Pennsylvania, and he claimed that somewhere along like 12 o'clock that night that they had 1.5 million absentee ballots that they were going to have to dig through that night. And I'm just sitting there going, holy crap. If that's the case, Joe Biden pulls it out. On a level, if those are legit, I totally get it. Does it look bad? Yes, they should have counted those like Florida and Ohio and Iowa did. Is they should have had a count ready, and they dropped them just like Arizona did. They didn't, and it made them look really, really bad, even if they're all legit.
So I have a graphic.
Yeah, totally agree.
I have a graphic up. Do you see the graphic?
I do see the graphic.
Yeah. So all the polls were closed in these states, and this is what it looked like in Pennsylvania at. And I'm assuming that this 10 p.m. is Central Time, which makes it 11 or 12 o'clock Eastern Time. The president was up 57% to 41. That's 15 points.
Yep.
In Michigan, he was up by 10 points. In Georgia, he was up by 7 and change. In North Carolina, he was up by 1.5. In Michigan, he was up by 10. And in Wisconsin, he was up by, it looks like 7, not 7, 4 points, 4 and change. Why did they stop counting?
I can't answer that, man. And I'm going to be honest, this is where this completely gets out of my wheelhouse. There's stuff that I find fishy. I absolutely do. And there's stuff that I'm going to have questions on for a long time. I do not have the expertise or the resources to remotely make a good conclusion on this. This is something for lawyers, the legal beagles, people who can actively use law enforcement and the judiciary to get truth, to actively go out, investigate things, find the videos, find the ballots that, look suspect, evaluate their credibility, that kind of thing. This is something that I have to trust in my community, my fellow Americans, to get right. If everything looks legit, they rule that. If it goes all the way to Supreme Court, they decide, yeah, these are legit, we're good. Or if they have to overturn the election, that has to be their responsibility. And I'm going to preach just for a second here.
Mm-hmm.
My fellow Americans, I beg of you, if this is not your expertise, unless you absolutely do not believe in the system, let the system do what it's going to do. What resources do you have that empowers you to know better than a lot of these people? I get it when you're like, hey, look, Philadelphia, man, that looks really sketch. I'm not sure how that's going to work. I agree with that. However, we do have Attorney General Barr and the federal judiciary that has every resource at their disposal to open up every can of worms and every tuna can out there,
Right.
pry into it and see where it goes. I firmly believe that if there is a way to rig this election and there's any way to find that there's evidence, it is completely within Trump and Barr's power to find that, to show it, and bring it up to the proper authorities to use that. And that's where I have to end on that.
So,
We are so thankful for you coming on.
Yeah.
Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you so much for coming on. We hope to have you again. Just to get you out of here, can you tell people where they can find you?
Yes.
And kind of what times you're usually doing a podcast?
Okay, that's great. So I host a political talk show on Twitch. I start usually at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I largely do recording of my podcast. We'll talk about that in just a second, where I do that, I do the show, and then I roll into an open panel political talk show, which basically is, depending on what day, people will just walk on and we talk about issues. It's having some success. It makes me enough money to pay the car bill. But other than that, that's just where you find me, twitch.tv/Tiberius D. All of what I record, though, for the podcast goes up on YouTube. And so you can see that in the visual part where I have my notes. And if you want to contact me, you can find me on Facebook, where I have all my infographics in the photos section. So you can see all the wonderful things that I look at. I'm working on updating that right now. We'll have that done later this week on a lot of the election stuff. I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to have a professional conversation with me, something with my credentials on there, which is unfortunately few and far between. We're still building those up. You can find me there, have a bit of a professional conversation. Or if you want me completely unfiltered, you can find me on like Twitter or Parler, or Parlay, I think is actually how they're supposed to say it. Last final note is that I just started my own political podcast. It is called Geopolitics with Tiberius D. You can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, that kind of thing. If you want my takes, I've got the first 3 episodes now up. The first one was just an introduction, who I am, like where I go, that kind of thing. First episode, future of the Republican Party. If you want to think where I think this party is going to go in a 10-minute skit, it's all up there. I just finished up the Democratic Party last night. It's up now live as well. And so you can go there. Tomorrow we'll be talking about, or the one that will be up late tonight, early tomorrow, will be the United States and explaining how it went from colony to superpower, the geographical advantages that empower us to being the world superpower, and where I see that leading us in the coming years.
You're one of our favorites. Thank you so much. Is your Twitch show every day or just during the week?
Every day except Monday. I do usually start at 9 p.m. That's not granted. That's what I have scheduled. However, I'm having a bit of the same issue that Rob is that my finances just crashed. This month I went red for the first time ever. Or not the first time ever, but the first time in a long time I actually was in the negative. I had to either like put some money on the credit card, or I had to go out and get new jobs. And one of the unfortunate things I'm having is that I'm having to work weekends doing a new job in food service, which is like I have a lot of experience in. And so I'm usually supposed to start the show at 9 o'clock. I didn't start it till 10:30 last night because there was business, thankfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I got paid, but unfortunately it messes with my schedule. So just disclaimer, usually weekdays I'm on it. The weekends look like they might be a little questionable.
All right. Well, thank you so very much for coming on. And I speak for Todd Bartlett. You're one of our favorites, and I'd love to be able to see you and talk to you again sometime in the near future. Thank you so much.
Invite me anytime. It's a pleasure to be here.
All righty.
Hey, talk to you soon, man. Take it easy.
Rob, he's just one of my favorites, and I have you to thank for that. I wanted to kick this to Todd Bartlett. Todd.
Reclaiming his time. Yeah.
Let him reclaim his time and tell us what's happening in your world, in the Bartlett world. In the Bartlett world.
So the new project was well underway this week with Wendy Bell Radio, and getting to know the team in the first week, putting puzzle pieces together and seeing the potential facility we'll be using and some of those plans, and putting names and faces and tables and chairs and things together, and just continuing the process. So if week one is any indication, I can't wait for this upcoming week and the week after and many, many weeks to come. So it's very exciting.
And just so the audience knows, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Couldn't hear Carlos. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, Carlos, of course. I'm on the road, and I do a better job with the mute button than Carlos.
Right.
Come on.
Just wanted to let the audience know real quick. For those of you who didn't know, 21-time Emmy winner Wendy Bell, huge voice here in Pennsylvania and nationally, has started a project that Todd's going to be a part of, where I think it's a very important thing, where they're going to be able to broadcast conservative voices and their opinions. Because they're starting this show themselves, they're not beholden to some sort of network that's going to want to fire them or control the message. So I think it's a great thing, and I'm personally can't wait to see more that comes out of the project. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, we actually have to thank Big Tech for that.
Yeah.
And also, it's like
the name of the company is Cancel 230.
Yeah. And just think when
Sorry,
Todd's
is that too soon?
Too soon.
When Todd's big time in it, hopefully he remembers us little people. I told Todd once he has several mansions, if he needs a custodian or anything, I would be willing to sell my services.
What's your name again?
Yeah.
Any updates on Myrtle Beach?
You'll probably get to talk a little more on your show too, right?
Yeah.
It's tough with Carlos. We both like to talk a little. I don't know if you know.
Let me see. How do I say this about Myrtle Beach? There's plenty moving on the Myrtle Beach case, and just from a timeline standpoint, there were 2 arrests made yesterday in a separate case, but here's why it's relevant to Myrtle Beach, potentially. The case that has had arrests made in it yesterday was referred by our current district attorney, Ryan Gardner, to the Attorney General's office in April. Myrtle Beach was referred to the Attorney General in May.
So
not saying that means anything,
right?
But just from a historical and timing standpoint, that's what's going on.
Hopefully the AG will be giving out some Merry Christmas to most of us.
And it wouldn't be a great fall Saturday or late fall Saturday, right? Early winter.
Yeah.
If the Buckeyes weren't winning by 2 touchdowns with an interim head coach.
All right.
Did I mention that already?
Can you give me your final comments without mentioning the Buckeyes?
And we almost turned it over. So, yeah. And this is completely off the cuff and from the heart. The folks that Wendy and myself and the team that's being put together are working with, collaborating with. When you talk about putting best foot forward and bringing resources to the table and just being able to pursue your passion and your dreams and doing it, in my humble opinion, the right way, you could not have asked for better people in this whole process, the whole project. And this week really demonstrated that to me. I mean, just any question you have, the dialogue is a two-way dialogue, right? It is not yes, there is a structure, there is a management structure, there's great respect. And it's a mutual respect of they've done amazing things in building their business, which has allowed them to go and do this project and potentially enter this particular business. It is amazing what's going on, right? And I'm speaking globally and broadly. I wish I could tell you more. Hopefully we're in the next couple of weeks going to be able to tell you a lot more and show you a lot more. I mean, just the facility alone that they're going to allow us to make the magic with, right, is just, it's unbelievable.
Well, fantastic. Godspeed with that. Robert Knorr, I'd like you to give me your final comments, and I was hoping you would start with your thoughts on Pelosi admitting that she used the virus as a political football.
Yeah. I mean, if you listen to a certain Pennsylvania Patriot Radio show, you might have been hearing these sort of things for, months and months about how the Democrats were using the response to COVID as a political football and how disgusting that is. I mean, for those that didn't see, Pelosi had been advocating what she called a big COVID stimulus deal. And the idea was that she wanted to basically bail out a bunch of Democrat states, give a bunch of money to her corporate friends, similar to what the first $1.7 trillion stimulus did. As I correctly predicted back then, the majority of that money would not go to the actual people that needed the most help. Instead, it went to things like liberal arts centers, Planned Parenthood, Shake Shack, the LA Lakers, et cetera, et cetera. My wife, who works in a bank, told me repeatedly that even when it came to the small business loans, the small businesses in our town came in hands in the air, had no clue how to even begin to apply for these loans. And almost all of them, it was too late by the time they got the relevant information to be able to get access to that. So what we saw was trillions of dollars wasted. That's what Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats were advocating again out of the House of Representatives.
This is not wasted. I tell you, Rich, right now, this is not a wasted project, Mr. Noor, and you should really stop talking to me this way and really change your tone when you're speaking to the speaker of the House.
Yeah. Have some more ice cream and another shot of vodka, Miss Pelosi. But anyway, so that was what she wanted. And this is what it's always been. And say what you will, I criticize a lot of the Republican leadership as well. I do believe that they were trying, or at least were suggesting, putting forth a bill that would have just been what they referred to as a smaller in scope stimulus, which was just to send checks to the American people. The whole thing's asinine. They collapsed our economy and then are saying, well, now we have to send you money to keep you afloat. It's their fault that they collapsed the economy in the first place. Nonetheless, Nancy Pelosi refused to do the actual stimulus that went directly to the people. She said that they needed to do the all-encompassing package. Well, she came out yesterday and said, well, now that it's apparent that Joe Biden will be the one nominated, now I'm okay with sending that small bill. What this was an admission, as we suggested here on this show many times, they wanted you to suffer. That's right. What this was.
They shoved ice cream on my mask.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure the ice cream company that she, the $20 a gallon ice cream she bought, I'm sure they got some bailout.
Sipping the vodka through the mask is difficult. That's why I have to take off the mask.
When you're getting your hair done. Right. So
she sold me out, Mr. Noor. She sold me out.
I feel like my chances of getting hired by the DNC are decreasing by the moment. But
oh my God.
So what happens is, exactly what we were suggesting. Can anyone, I'm willing to listen to any Democrat, give me any sort of coherent message why 2 weeks ago it was unacceptable to give this stimulus, according to Nancy Pelosi, but today it's okay. There is only, and it's over and over, how many times on this show do we talk about supposedly these experts that know so much, whether it be economic experts or the political experts, or it be the scientific experts and the medical experts. They make these decisions that a layman wouldn't make. The average person on the street, the average drunk in the bar would be able to make a better decision than these so-called experts. So, for example, you could have went up to anyone in this country with half a brain and said, hey, there's going to be this bad disease. Who do you think it'll affect the most? And without a doubt, 80% of people would have said probably elderly people with comorbidities. Yeah, our experts
talking about me again.
No, this is Secretary Levine and Governor Wolf and Whitmer and Cuomo and Murphy that I'm talking. All Democrats, by the way. Somehow they didn't know not to put COVID patients in nursing homes. Somehow the Democratic Party and Nancy Pelosi didn't know, if we don't send these stimulus checks out to people we say they need or they'll suffer, if we don't send them out, they're going to suffer. But now it's okay to send them out once it benefits our side. This was about one thing, and it was making as much pain as possible on the middle class and the working class in order to blame Donald Trump and to consolidate power for the establishment. That's what it was about. And that's what's going on everywhere we see. How is it, we talked to Tiberius about kind of the idea of collectivism, and many people on the left kind of but migrating further to that camp. They claim to be moral and be for the little guy. How can you explain that the very policies they've advocated for have crushed the worker, have crushed small businesses, but they doubled Amazon's profit? Walmart's up 80%. How do you explain this? And we still hear this kind of argument, well, you have to embrace the lockdown or else. And it's being issued by people that are unwilling to follow the science. For example, most of the people like Garcetti, Newsom, other people like that are advocating for school closures, even though the science all says that's a huge mistake. They're advocating for lockdowns, even when the World Health Organization says that's a mistake to have a lockdown last more than 2 weeks. And they're violating their own orders. So what we see is a situation where it is clear that the leaders of this country hold the people with contempt. And I've said this for a long time. They view themselves as a separate species than us. They don't care. The rules don't apply to them. And they've duped millions of people to think that it is the moral and righteous thing to rat out their neighbors, to blame poor people, to blame people that want to go to church and blame people that want to go to work, to blame Trump supporters, which, as we talked about, tend to be the poorest Americans, or at least from the poorest counties. Those are the people that have been scapegoated. This revolution is aimed at the top to the working class and to the poor people. And it's being led by establishment people in the Republican and Democratic Party, the media, the tech companies, Silicon Valley in general, academia. But certainly the face of it is the Democratic Party and people like Joe Biden. Now we're starting to see, lo and behold, who predicted it again? Wjoe Biden's issuing a lot of policies, putting a lot of people in place that the Bernie bros, the progressives, don't really like. Who would have guessed it? You were willful dupes is what you were. Mm-hmm. And now that you've put corporatist Joe Biden, who's been in office for 47 years, you voted him in to change wealth disparity. You voted him in to end corruption and the establishment and the oligarch that goes on in Washington. Good luck with that. So, I'm going through some crazy stuff in my life right now, but everything will be all right. The country seems like it's going crazy right now. Everything's going to be all right. The most important thing is remember yourself, remember your friends and family and loved ones. That's what comes first in life. We're going to get through this together. And I could speak for Todd and Carlos and myself when I say we're going to keep fighting. We're never going to give up. And, I think that there's going to be opportunities for our voice to become more important on the horizon. And I look forward to it.
He's right. In my world, the ice cream and vodka will be free.
Now you're Russian. Pelosi not liking you today, I assure you.
Yes. So I wanted to make sure
Leave me alone. Just leave me alone, okay? I'm going to go back to the ice cream and the vodka, and then Carlos will kind of talk and then close out the show.
So I want to make sure that I thank Heather Heidelbaugh and Tiberius D for being our guests today, and also Jason Fitzgerald for coming in for that little bit.
Does that even qualify as a cameo since he wasn't on camera?
It's a cameo.
Look, when we're in syndication, that's royalties to Fitz. Period. His voice was heard. He gets the royalty. It's that simple.
Does send me the check.
It's like a kid in the Williamsport Area School District. I logged in for the day. That counts as attendance, right?
Yep. If this collusion of the DNC and mainstream media and intel agencies and the Pentagon and big tech and academia and Hollywood isn't remedied, I will quote my very good friend Robert Nader by saying, they'll never need to steal one ballot in the future in any election ever again, based on the implacable wall of propaganda fire they control and direct towards us. You want some evidence? The coronavirus lockdowns. Do it or else we'll come for you. And if we don't get to you, we'll put you on a list, because you're not going to get in the way of our pristine egalitarian vision of perfection, because we will do anything to see that vision through, even if it costs your life. That's what they're saying. Think for a few minutes every night before you go to bed and you put your head on the pillow about how you're going to change your relationship with authority and how to rethink your decent and natural inclination to comply and trust those who wield it, given the circumstances now at hand. These are going to be some of the very valid questions that will arise if the president loses this election. Where will our trust in the system go, because it will vanish. I will repeat what I said at the beginning of the show. The only person standing between our constitutional republic and total anarchy is Donald Trump, of all people. The way that you become stronger and the way that you help him is to be happy. Be good. Do right. Pursue virtue. And to never, ever, ever give up. We're not going to. Until then, we'll see you.
If I can't, real quick, just to let people know, this video is going to go for another hour till I get home. I don't know if I can talk about this real quick, but we were out getting COVID tested where I was doing this, and it appears as if we are positive for COVID. So that's what the test shows. So if you could just keep us in your thoughts, we're not bummed out. We're not those type of people, but my wife is almost 9 months pregnant. We just found out that she has it. So we've been operating as if we had it anyways once we found out family did. So apologies for the video that will be going an hour with just a black screen. And, thanks for all your thoughts and prayers. And thanks for sticking up thanks for sticking it out with me today, Carlos and Todd, despite the technical issues. I apologize.
Absolutely no problem. Then, of course, in the final video, we'll have that edited, that last hour of black out. So, and then we'll put it up. But we will also have the Zoom link that we will post on the website, on Facebook, and on Twitter to direct you to today's episode. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Robert Knorr. Godspeed.
2 people managed to watch through that. So we just got back. We're safe. Yeah, my wife and I tested positive for COVID. If you're wondering why the screen was black for so long, I had to leave the computer running while I was gone. So heading out now. But yeah, keep us in your thoughts. We'll be fine. So thanks so much. We'll talk to you